Welcome to the conversation between Lucio Pozzi and David Ebony. Hal Bromm here. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks to Katie Svensson for coordinating this event. For your information, the talk is being recorded and will be uploaded to the gallery's YouTube site, and also will be on our website. If you have questions or comments, please write them in the chat box, and we will aim to respond toward the end of the event. Today, we will be discussing Lucio Pozzi's prolific career in conjunction with his current exhibition, Time and Again, here at the gallery. On view through late January, the exhibition features lushly colorful new paintings in conversation with early 70s reductivist diptychs. Lucio was born in Milan and moved to the United States as a guest of the Harvard International Seminar. Though foremost a painter, Lucio considers writing, drawing, and sculpture to be valuable tools in his work. He has taught and lectured extensively at institutions including Cooper Union, Yale, Princeton, Maryland Institute, and SVA. Lucio Pozzi has worked with this gallery since its founding in 1975, and in over 4 decades has participated in numerous installations and exhibitions here. Several of these will be discussed today. He currently divides his time between Hudson, New York, and Villaggio, Italy. We're honored to be joined by David Ebony, a renowned art critic, curator, art historian, and friend. He received his MA in art history from Hunter College, studying with theorist Rosalind Krauss and artist Robert Morris. David is currently a contributing editor of Art in America and a frequent contributor to ArtNet News and Yale University Press Online, among other publications. David is a member of AICA and the author of numerous artist monographs. Lucio, David, Katie, and I are delighted to have you with us today. David, would you like to begin the conversation?
Yes, Hal, thank you very much for that introduction. It was very nice. And I'm so delighted to be here via Zoom with Lucio Pozzi, who is one of the art world's best kept secrets, I say, because he's a cult figure in the art world. Those in the know his work. He's been around for a long, long time, and he's never been, he always changes. He's never been doing the same thing. He's got an incredibly multifaceted career that we should all know better. And I hope that this presentation will open up some new audiences for Lucio's work, because it's incredibly brilliant, beautiful, and profound. How's that, Lucio, for an introduction?
How are you?
Why are you a best kept secret? What has taken you so long to become a household name? Why are you keeping us waiting?
I have no idea. I just work as much as I can and bless every day. I have the energy and the ideas, make art in all levels, on all levels, from the big to the small to the ephemeral. And my dialogue with the world is possible, and I try to make it. Spectators can be as creative as they can when they approach my art. So the dialogue is always open.
The door is always open.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful statement. Tell us a little bit about how did you get involved in the art world? Tell us about your background and how you started to make art.
Well, my mother was divorced from my father, and after the war, she married a British sculptor, Michael Noble, who influenced me very deeply. He taught me very many things that I still practice in art. And he being a sculptor, I sort of decided to become a painter. And when I moved to New York, I approached art in a way that was essential for my learning.
Essential in what way?
Well, coming from it is very theoretical. In the United States, I touched firsthand that which I'd only read about, which is pragmatism, the William James kind of pragmatism. And I really saw firsthand by meeting artists how to approach art in a direct way instead of filtering it through too much of an abstract discourse.
Your first attraction was when you came, were you already making art in Italy, or did you make art when you came to the United States?
No, I was making art and already exhibiting it in Italy. And I was part of a group of people who looked upon American art as a model. Occasionally, I was living in Rome, and we occasionally would see one Rothko, or one Ellsworth Kelly, one Newman, that some Center for the Arts, it was Roman New York association, something like that. Occasionally, these things would be seen. But in Rome, there was Cy Twombly, and he was a big influence on many of us.
Did you know him personally?
The gallery he was showing with Topazio Alliata brought me once for a tea at the palazzo where he was living with his wife at the time. I remember this big palazzo with furniture and incredible monumental cloths and paintings and whatever. And I had, I was very young and he was a mature artist. And so I just listened to the exchange between him and other people. I could not say I would have met him, but I had an interesting listening situation with him.
Mm-hmm. Your work is so extraordinary in that it's both minimalism and maximalism. But your first attraction was to minimalism. What is your feeling about that? Your relationship to minimalism?
But the little painting you see on the left side of the screen was in 1961, and it was a basic experience for me because I reduced the terms of painting to the utmost. On the other hand, I also hinted at overlap and a third dimensionality. I refused all my life to flatten painting in an exclusive manner. And so from there, I extended my imagination, my painter imagination, to the extreme. And shortly after doing that painting, which has 2 bars, I call it MCH as a homage to Malevich. I also shortly after did that much more Baroque painting, in which you see some blobs floating over some imaginary shapes, and where the 3-dimensionality is not anymore hinted at, but actually is practiced in a more obvious way. That dichotomy between that which seems more abstract and which seems less abstract is something that has accompanied me all my life. I am very keen on that because when I know something too well, I need to switch to something that gives me more panic and excitement. And then when I begin to know that more, then I switch back maybe to something which is more exciting at the time, which has become forgotten. This zigzag is crucial to my practice. This is an opportunity to talk about the fact At one point around 30 years ago, Merrill Wagner asked me to join the American Abstract Artists Association. And I was accepted by them at the condition that they would know they would do things that would seem abstract and things that would appear to be more realistic or figurative. And that them accepting me meant also a redefinition of what abstraction is.
Mhm. Is that when you met Emily Mason? Because Emily, I've worked with Emily on a number of books, and her mother, Alice Trumbull Mason, was one of the founders of that organization, correct?
Yeah, Emily and her husband Wolf were among the first. Wolf Kahn were the first American artists, among the first American artists I met in Rome. When I came to New York, I stayed in their loft, which was on Broadway, as the first were places to stay in. They became big friends, and we talked about painting very much.
Mm-hmm. But it was Mara Wagner who invited you to join that group.
Mary Wagner I met later in the 70s, and I think I met her and Robert Ryman, her husband, through my being my starting to exhibit at John Weber Gallery.
That John Weber was the center of so much avant-garde work at that time. What was your well, maybe we should show some more works.
Yeah.
Because also your practice, as they say these days, was multifaceted in that it also included performance. You all along had a performative element to many of the projects that you did. So was this one of the first, this called Paper Swim from 1971?
Yeah, I did Paper Swim in 1971 in Milan before coming to the States. And then I did it again at Tyler School of the Arts in 1987. And then I did a third one at the Dia Center for the Arts in Mercer Street in New York in 1991. And a big video was taken of it at the time. Paper Swim was my answer. I was insisting in the importance of painting. As you know, painters are told that painting is dead every 10 years, more or less, since 1890. And so I found myself caught into one of those fashions in the late 60s. And people told me that painting was dead. There was a certain Joseph Beuys doing actions in Germany. And so I was having a show in a gallery in Milan where Robert Rauschenberg and other Americans were showing. And so I told myself, well, I'll show them that painting extends in all kinds of ways, also in this thing which they call actions. At the time, no one was talking of performance. I was very fascinated by the history of theater in Italy and in Europe. And I called these things pantomimes, which is an old performance art, which starts even before the medieval times in all the civilizations of the world. So I crumpled all kinds of paper from the newspaper, which I discovered newspapers were throwing out before changing the rotaries in yards of paper. I dove underneath with blinders to symbolize the oblivion of the world that artists, painters especially have when they paint. And I dove underneath wearing this leotard and came out.
Is that you? Is that you?
That's me. Every minute or two, I came out like Venus from the sea and made a mysterious mark on the paper and dove underneath. And I started doing performances with absurd office hours at the time, which I still do, 8 hours. This was an 8-hour performance. It leaves you exhausted as you can possibly be. And it is an interesting thing to do.
I wonder if Marina Abramovich knows about this work.
At the time, I met Marina Abramovich in New York later on, and I was introduced to her, she was introduced to me as co-performers. But I was insisting on painting, so I was not labeled as a performer. I was labeled as a painter.
Mhm.
And we talked a little bit, and she took off her career in one way, and I took off mine in the other way.
Mhm. When you did this performance, where is the audience? Is this on a stage, or how's the audience involved?
At the time I did it, this was a storefront that was next to the gallery. And the performance I did after, I did one every day for 7, I meant to do one every day for 7 days. But the one after this one was that I was doing a shootout. There were people, actors standing with the audience, with the passers-by in the street, and I was inviting people to come in. Every half an hour, there would be a shootout. There would be an execution. And the actors came in with the audience. There were always 10 people, more or less, passers-by. And at half hour exactly, the 2 actors would arrest a third actor, drag him or her against a wall and shoot at this person with a blank, and then drag the corpse in the back store. And so in the middle of this 8 hours of performance, the police came and arrested me and started interrogating me about whether I was a communist. So my performance was interrupted, and I spent the night with the police trying to explain what I was doing. And they did not know what an artwork for aesthetic purpose meant. I remember the police asking me with a big typewriter, "How do you write aesthetic?" But then I got scared around 2 o'clock at night because there was an anarchist had been suicided in the same office a couple of months before. So even though I wanted to be very independent from my father, I called him at 2 o'clock at night and said, "Listen, if you know any general or any official who could drag me out of here, it would be better," because I was afraid. I was very scared.
Wow, that's a great story. And this leads to your political installations, like is it the next slide? Oh no, this is the turnovers. We'll go back and forth, I guess, from different mediums. Like this was the one I was thinking of.
Politics are inevitable. And I think that even when you do something which is called abstract, standing for the autonomy of artistic thought and for invention. In this case, it was in Diego Cortes's early gallery in his apartment on the Lower East Side. And I had
Cortez.
Sorry?
The late, wonderful, great Diego Cortez.
Yeah, Diego Cortez, a great entrepreneur and great artist. I have many works of his that at one point he had asked me to return to him because a collector wanted them. And they are in my warehouse in Hudson, but I cannot find them. They're in the middle of things. I have a print we did together. Anyhow, in this case, there were an alignment of leaders from pacifist and leftist leaders on the bottom of a wall. On the opposite wall, there were the removed eyes in strips. And above the strips, there was a gentleman in a business suit watching 2 other gentlemen beating a third one. And his eye was dabbed with pink. And I called this situation a pink eye that hinted at pinko, which was what sympathizers of communism were accused of during the McCarthy era. And also because pink eye is a disease of the it's a name for conjunctivitis. And so when people ask me what the meaning of a work is, whether it is quote unquote abstract or whether it is more quote unquote pointedly figurative or seem to have meanings, I normally refuse to explain because I like art to have different explanations, which and I like the explanations to be generated by the spectators. The spectators become creative and creatively misunderstand or re-understand my art. Often I don't know the meaning it myself.
But in some cases, like this particular work it's a historical piece, you know, not only within recent art history, but you're dealing with historical events. So there, for new generations, needs some sort of explanation of what it is. Like, why did you choose the three figures that we see on the left?
Those figures,
Yeah,
they're among the leaders of the. One is Salvador Allende, one is Lumumba, and one is Che Guevara. Their eyes were removed and replaced across the wall from where they were aligned. Why, I will not explain. I do not know the exact meaning of this. There are millions of explanations available, and I like everybody to contribute their own ideas if they wish.
yes, please ask questions. The audience should please write in some questions that they might have for Lucio. But I also wanted to talk about this installation because it's characteristic in a way of the kinds of unusual, unexpected installations that you've done over the years, where you have these photos way at the bottom. Nothing's at eye level. I guess in this case, maybe the cutout eyes. But what is your modus operandi for doing such eccentric, I guess, eccentric installations?
I like to have tools that are flexible. In this case, as you will see in other works that we see today, or at least some of them, there is a very simple tool, very simplistic tool. There is something which is located, there's something which is cut off, and is relocated somewhere. So this relocation can happen with paint applied on wood. It can happen with photographs and have different variations of meaning available. Relocation is one of the, in this case, you see a piece of wood that has been painted on both sides, has been cut, and a piece is turned over and relocated, applied on top of the original piece of wood. And the two colors mix with vertical brush strokes and horizontal brush strokes, rearranging themselves at just by taste and by some kind of mathematical game I might play. The relocation is one of the things that I can rely on if I want to do something. And the something I want to do comes from the turns of circumstances in my mind. It comes from from a request from somebody or from a desire that the location might call for. Like for instance, in the show at Hal Bromm currently now, there was a white cabinet against the wall and there was a black cabinet. So I corralled I called back the idea of relocation to make two sculptures, two painted sculptures that are hung on top of the wall of I put the black on top of the white cabinet.
Yeah, we'll be looking at that in a moment.
We'll see them later on. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out this painting behind me. It reminds me of a turnover piece that has exploded from the top. You painted this in 1983, and it's called the Gush. And I always admired this painting because it sort of represents this multifaceted thing that you do, as we can see from these turnover pieces to the watercolors that you do that you've always done throughout your career, like these. How do you reconcile those two endeavors?
It's inevitable that I am myself, as I challenge myself to all kinds of visual languages, and it's inevitable that my time and my place seep into the works I do. I think one cannot be other than oneself. So as I stretch myself, as I stretch the links between the different endeavors I engage myself in, all kinds of connections reveal themselves, hopefully without my even knowing them. If you look carefully at the formats and the forms that I engage in, you can see incredible connections that become obvious if one spends time to look for them. They're not formulas, they're forms.
And and color relationships are often consistent.
Colors are a choice that comes without my deciding. I don't pre-decide my colors. I try to always change my sense of colors, and I'm resigned to the fact that I have a kind of range of colors that keeps popping out no matter what I do.
What are they?
I don't know. In this case, there's a dualism, which is on top, there's the blue sky, and underneath, there are all kinds of blobs that are arranged in formations that can be identified as bushes or grass or whatever. There are a couple of buildings in both cases. And I don't go beyond that. I don't explain much. I try to develop my sensibility as challenged by whatever theme I happen to be engaged in. The theme is given by my alternating one way of making art to another one, so that I keep on the edge all the time. I don't feel good if I am settled into a way that guarantees somehow my research or my exploration.
What about your environment? What about the place where you are in a specific moment?
Yeah, that surely affects me. Even it surely affects me because it affects me as a site, but also as a cultural site. But I don't enumerate the conditions by which my work develops. I don't have time. I follow the situation I'm in its truth.
Where these were painted?
This was painted in Sardinia. It's a seascape. The other ones you showed before were in the countryside somewhere.
And you're painting on site. You painted on the beach here, you were on the beach. These were not made from photographs.
No, I was sitting there and I had my watercolors and I tried to observe what I saw. But there's no way for all the universe of mine and everybody's history and imagination not to pour in the making of any work of art. There's no way. I'm not seeking original formulas. I'm seeking the single experience and the intrinsic value, the intensity of every work. I feel that if I generalize too much, or if I give myself themes that are too restrictive, I will lose the intensity. And I am very keen on daring myself always to the utmost, to start to making watercolors or making apparent still lifes with flowers like the one behind me was breaking very many taboos, to dare myself to go as far as I could into understanding painting, sensibility, and trying to reach for that which is unreachable, which is the intensity.
And next. So this is the dichotomy right here with your watercolors. The one left, a intelligible landscape, and on the right, this is some sort of a unconscious, quasi-surrealist approach.
Yeah, surrealism is inevitable, I think, for everybody. If you look at much contemporary art, surrealism has affected us all without us knowing. I don't know how, like very many of the things I do, I don't know the outcome. I start with some images and then start painting and see what happens, and the shapes transform themselves into one way or another. And I'm as surprised at the end result as anyone who sees it for the first time. This scene here seems to be fairly erotic and science fiction-ish. And I see a kind of Maldievich kind of black triangle put in as a tail of that greenish building. But don't ask me how it happened and what I meant, because I am a spectator while I paint.
Does it have to do with your mood at the time? Is it something about your psychic state where you're drawn to do an imaginary landscape, and then the imaginary interior, or trying to convey some sort of interior mindset?
Yeah, more than conveying, they try to be witness to the state of mind. That's a very good question. The mood always affects me. There's no way, and I would like very much the spectators, whoever looks, to be able to project their own mood as a reflection of what I do, and not try to interpret what I meant, but try to interpret what my work is causing in them.
And it's not exactly a dream image. I just wonder about, I have often spoken in the past with the Brazilian artist Tunga about his inspiration that came from the hypnagogic state. You know, the state between consciousness and the dream state before you fall asleep.
Yeah. Before I do anything, before I do a performance, before I get into inventing an installation, before I paint, I meditate and I put myself in an altered state, always. Instead of counting myself back into reality, I stop to count down and enter into the activity of whatever situation I'm in.
Wonderful. Shall we go to the next image? This is an aspect of your career which many people don't realize is very important. And that was, you were the publisher of New Observations. And it was a platform for young writers and also established writers too, and artists to, well, can you describe what your endeavor was here in the publishing world and how you got there?
Yes, I've always been attracted by criticism, the critical outlook. And at one point I was teaching in Princeton, and I had been invited there under the influence, under the recommendation of Jeremy Gilbert Rolfe. And being in Princeton, I told Jeremy, listen, there's all kinds of printing devices here. Why don't we publish a little ad hoc magazine while we're here? And so Jeremy told me that Rosalind Krauss and Annette Michelson were thinking of leaving Art Forum, and maybe they could join us in this venture. And somehow I found myself unknowingly being the founder of October magazine. And we had various meetings and tried to understand how to incorporate it. And before it opened, I realized that October magazine was going to be a scholarly endeavor that I could not commit my full time to. And so Annette Michelson called it October, named it October. And I designed the magazine with its big number, and designed also the typography. And a Princeton student, Charles White, went on to define it, and defined it quite marvelously. And I left the magazine because I felt it was too much for me to handle. But I could not resist the temptation of going on doing some printing. So at the time, my studio activity was very, very heavy. I was having shows everywhere in the mid-70s, and I could not handle everything I wanted to do. But I did want to do something. It's like the artist coming out from his or her ivory tower and doing collaborative work with other artists or other writers, other creative people. And my idea was to get something on a spontaneous manner in a way that could not take too much time. And so one of the people who were working, helping me in the studio, one of these people was Betsy Sassler, who after working with my studio began to start her own magazine called Bomb. And Betsy helped me in gathering other people to participate in what I call New Observations. New Observations was my answer to the more scholarly publications like October magazine. I called it Observations because it was the most banal title I would give it, and new because everything has to be new, as we know from our supermarkets. So it was a kind of ironic title. It had to do with observing and also had to be new, whatever that meant.
But you were able to get some very influential people involved, like here, Maurice Berger. I think this issue is from 1984, 1985. And then on the right, 1989. So you were able to bring on board a lot of, very, very influential writers and critics.
As with my art, there was panic and excitement and improvisation. I would meet someone who seemed to be an interesting person or with whom I would have an interesting conversation, and would ask them to produce a magazine as fast as they could, not to have too much self-consciousness seep into it. So I would give them 2 weeks, and many of the time they would panic. My idea was that anyone who knows anyone else shares an ideology, an aesthetic, and a way of thinking that is inevitable. And I felt that by pressuring people to work fast, they would catch, and I would catch, a moment, a passing moment in the culture that I was part of in New York and the States and also internationally. So without my even knowing, people invited artists to then reveal themselves, or writers that reveal themselves as being extremely influential. But often I did not know them myself. Like here you see some names that, like Herbert Mouchamp, whom I had never met, Cheryl Levine I never met, I met them after. And this was very much part of my way of seeing art. I want art and art culture to somehow come down from the pedestal. I like it to be a living event, both for me, artists, for the writers, and especially for the spectators and the readers. I don't like to impose what we do on people. I like it to be a bridge for all kinds of different interpretations. And I call them creative misunderstandings because the spectator now has achieved an autonomy which he or she never had before in the history of art. And I want to cultivate this. And I was started already then in the 70s, already actually in the 60s, I started cultivating, understanding what this would mean. Of course, it was like walking in a fog and not knowing exactly what would come. the results have been so far the good seeds for what I'm doing, and possibly other people might like to do also.
Great, that's wonderful. Let's go to the next image. So here
we have another relocation. This was at the Hal Bromm Gallery. It was called Helmsman's Fear. The Senator Jesse Helm, whom you see in this photograph with his eyes removed, was particularly angry about shows of Robert Mapplethorpe and what was his name? The Chilean photographer who showed the Polo Cooper. He showed the
Serrano, Andre Serrano.
Serrano. So I again with ambiguity, I answered his polemics by making this piece in which his portrait had the eyes removed and the eyes were placed in front of the genitals of models standing in the David of Michelangelo pose. And like the David of Michelangelo had the genitals in view, and the genitals were framed by the helm, and the eyes of the senator were replaced behind the big red slab that was hanging from the ceiling. Another mechanism that I acted here besides removal and relocation was the four colors, the four primary colors that I like to use: yellow, green, and blue, and red, and which helped me to do all kinds of situations in one way or another.
What was the reaction to this exhibition?
Well, many people saw the exhibition. The New York Times wrote a review of 3 lines saying I was making fun of Senator Helms. But my friend, the painter Moore, took one of these pieces and exhibited in Lincoln Center. And when I was traveling in Europe at the time, I came back and I saw my piece on full page in the Village Voice with the title "Censorship at Lincoln Center." Somehow, during a meeting of some kind of religious group, some janitor decided it would be better to shroud with a black canvas the genitals of the photograph of the model, and that was one of the reactions.
Wow. Wow, that's extreme. Terrible. Should we go to the next? These were among your first very large-scale paintings at the time. They were, they're mural size, aren't they? And
yeah, they're very big.
You were incorporating some of your earlier works in these compositions. Can you talk about these a little bit?
Exactly. This was my way of having everything intersect. My work is like a network of strands, logical and visual strands that keep intersecting. And by zooming in and out of different imaginary realities, they can reappear and disappear and be transformed. In this case, in the panel on the right, you can see a quotation, a quote of my level group with the diptychs with vertical and horizontal brushstrokes that are applied normally on an empty wall. In this case, instead they float like 2 rectangles in an imaginary scene full of potential symbolism and representations that again, I let everyone interpret as they wish. On the right, on the left side, you see a kind of elk that supports a geometric figure, like a cloud, and then you see migration images, soldiers from the Napoleonic War. And don't ask me why I would use this imagery, because I probably picked them at random from illustrations or memories. I see in both of these paintings, they're soldiers. there is a soldier on the lower left of the painting on the right that has a helmet like World War II, and on the panel on the left are soldiers that look like Napoleonic soldiers. But then all kinds of other scenes happen. And again, I prompted my imagination to produce whatever it liked, and trying not to know ahead of time what I would represent, but trying the act of painting and the mood and the intellect generate the images.
Weren't these the culminating works in a museum retrospective you had was it in Bielefeld in Germany?
Yes, they were there. They were also in another retrospective I had in Detroit at the Museum of New Art in the 90s. And it was interesting that a young man came to me to my one-man retrospective and asked me, how did I feel exhibiting all these other artists?
Well, that's a compliment for you, isn't it?
I said, thank you. Then he was very bashful about it. I said, no, it's very regular that you would think that, because the art world has conditioned you to think that way. But I'm an artist, and I'm not the only one who has tried to come out from that way of thinking of art in terms of formulas. And I think of art in terms of languages that expand and intersect, or like a big keyboard, like a big keyboard you can play 2 notes on sometimes and very many other notes on other times. And so he left the conversation in a more reassured.
and different songs too, different tunes. But these works, I feel they have a kind of retrospective feel to them, where you consciously are, putting together everything that led up to this in your career.
Yeah, the Bielefeld retrospective had 400 works, very big works and very small works. And I also did a performance there. And it had from small to big, from more quote unquote abstract to more quote unquote figurative. And it had the whole array. When after the retrospective, which was particularly well received in Germany, it was a Philip Johnson building, and my show occupied it all. The works came back, and I told John Weber, why could we not arrange an exhibition of the same kind, maybe with not 400 works, maybe less works, in New York? So he gathered Susan Caldwell and Leo Castelli and himself to exhibit a very diversified exhibition of my work. And the reaction in New York was particularly negative. People thought that John Weber and I had lost our mind, and Leo Castelli also, and Susan Caldwell, of course.
What was your relationship to the trans avant-garde movement in Italy at this time?
Well, by the time I came to New York in 62, I'm sorry. And I was trying to leave Italy and its historicism behind for it not to condition me too much, even though there's no way anyone can forget one's past. In my background, I had both the Baroque paintings that I saw in the churches I was having to frequent, and also the avant-garde. And by living in Rome, I'd been in touch with whatever was happening in many fields. Cunellis was an acquaintance. As I told you, I visited Twombly. But from the very beginning, I must say, and I began to develop that kind of distance from the concept of avant-garde. I somehow distanced myself from any formula, any labeling. And when they When I was labeled a conceptual painter, I did not like it. When I was labeled an avant-garde artist, I did not like it. I think that our times has gone far beyond such Manichaean distinctions. And we're not realizing how far beyond that we are. I see young artists are intuitively understanding this much more than my generation.
Why do you think that's the case?
I don't know, maybe they're just fed up with formulas, or maybe some of them do produce a reliable product that's recognizable, but very many younger artists I see all over the world don't give a damn about classifications anymore. And that I'm really happy with. I suffered through the difficulties of getting rid of divesting the strictures that had been put on me, but they seem to be doing it naturally. They hop from making art for the cybernetic digital art to making paintings, and sometimes they do theater, they do pantomime, sometimes they do this painting or that painting, and I'm elated by this, even though I don't always like what they do, but I'm elated by the methodology that they follow, instinctively probably.
You were far ahead of your time.
Well, I didn't try to, but I know what straitjacket of my times I could not fit in. And so, in order to survive, I've tried other ways.
Mhm.
Lucio, at one point, you told me that a critic said to you, I believe it was a critic, said to you, "Why don't you find a style?" Do you remember that?
Oh, many have told me that. And many have told me you need to develop name recognition or product recognition or both. So I answered that in 1975 with a kind of absurdist panel, which I called, "Oh God, make me find a style," which is an echo of Janis Joplin, "Oh God, make me have a Mercedes Benz." And that was my answer. And the panel continued with, "I can't find a style. And, how can I find a style and whatever?" You know, the style is a capitalist invention that started around the 15th century and has lasted still now. I do have enormous respect for artists who want to concentrate on one single small realm, which in their hands becomes enormous. But I don't want to be dismissed by not having a style, because I do have a style. And when people begin to look at my work more and more, they recognize the inevitability of my personal calligraphy and my eye and my taste. There's nothing I can do about it. We cannot avoid it.
Can we look at more work?
Yeah, let's look at work.
Oh, what about these? These are called rag rug paintings that you're doing today. You're doing these, continuing these now. What is this
It
process?
started with my not wanting. They are mosaic of palette knife, oil paint, alignments. And sometimes I improvise. As always, I don't know what the end result will be, but somehow I do manage to give myself a more restrictive theme. Like in these, there was a reddish motif on the left and a whitish motif on the right. I call them rag paintings because they started by using leftover paint from paint that had been mixed for other paintings. Like, for instance, when I was doing the one behind me, I also did a rag painting with its paint that was, instead of throwing it away, I lined it on a small canvas, which is somewhere. I don't know where it is now. Maybe it's not finished even. And the rag paintings have become a technique that allows me to make all kinds of inventions in different ways. And you find motifs in them that return in other paintings as well.
How much of these are improvised? Do you start out with a plan or?
Very, yeah. The only plan, these are big ones, but the only plans I had here was to try to have a black background. A critic once called it a Rothkoish background, and then to apply on top of it rectangles of bluish mixed paint. And I improvised completely. Every alignment, every line is improvised. I never know exactly how it will go. And I play around. And there's always panic and excitement until the end. In this case, though, you see those greenish bars that are horizontal, there are 4 greenish bars. Those were, the canvas was taped ahead of my doing the alignments on top. And the tapes were removed only at the end after I'd done the whole field with blue, and I decided what color to put in, and I did other alignments of greenish paint. Sometimes I take the palette knife instead and I fill it with a flat paint. It's never planned, and I never know exactly how it will end. And I never know if what I did was quote unquote right or wrong, because those are dimensions that maybe are obsolete. I think in my painting, and many painters never know exactly when something is finished and never know exactly what it might mean, and never know exactly if they did right or wrong. But once it's done, it's done.
Well, I think Larry Poons told me once that the art of painting is knowing when to stop. And when do you know that this composition is finished?
Yeah, that's very correct. It's my problem is that I never know when to stop.
But this has a very deliberate. Can we look at a couple more of these, because the compositions seem very tight and very deliberate in there. Are the ones, aren't there ones you showed in Hudson recently coming up? Oh,
yeah, go on.
Oh, this
Go
one.
on, other images. More images.
So this one, how much of this is improvised and how much was calculated, and when did you know this was finished?
I did not know. I really torture myself. You know, something very funny happens. Visitors come to my studio when I started painting, and I started with a wash of some paint. And I, like Picasso, think of every painting as being finished from the first brush stroke onwards. So many times visitors tell me, stop. Occasionally a visitor tells me, you must push it further. And I never know. I never know. In this case, I put the pink and the black squares first. And then I started following around and see what happens. I never knew what would happen. And I do really sincerely even suffer this. I'm not joking. It's sometimes I don't sleep at night wondering whether I should add something to it or not. And when I sometimes I even mix paint to add something, and then like a glass wall is erected in front of me, and I cannot approach the painting anymore and add. But there was a painting that was even reproduced in art form for a show at where I did at Julian Preto gallery many years ago. It must have been in the 90s. There were 4 gigantic panels, one red, one blue, one yellow, one green. And the blue one, I had specified to myself, I would put a black square in it. The square had been outlined by tape, and I showed it instead with a white square because I was not able to make myself put the black in. It was exhibited many times. When this quadriptych came back to the studio in the middle of the 2000s, I don't know when, from an exhibition, I told myself that actually the black square should be there. So I added the black square.
Oh.
And now the painting is not what it was reproduced as. It is historically reproduced with a white square, instead it has a black square.
Oh. Wow.
And I don't know if I did the right thing. I don't know if I did the right thing.
Interesting. Well, if it's right for you, that's the answer. Yeah. And shall we look at some installation works coming up? Just briefly talk about the. Could we
These are
go
the
back?
paintings that are,
I just wanted. Oh,
these are the paintings.
I
These
just wanted to
paintings
talk
are
about
now
this.
at Hal Bromm.
At CR10, you did this performance piece in 2013 and an exhibition.
This was at the center called CR10 in Hudson, New York.
Mm-hmm.
It's a gigantic space, and the space generated the idea.
I worked with Judy Pfaff on a show there, but I
After
called
mine, yes.
Grasshopper, but I missed this show. Was there a performance with this exhibition?
Yes, I did. During the exhibition in another room of the center, I did a performance in which I spoke an imaginary language called Pachamina, which is the name that my autistic brother had given to our gay, playful language while we were playing as kids. And again, Pachamina is nonsensical gibberish, but it indicates that the meaning in art is always escaping between the two extremes of sense and nonsense. So in this case, there was upstairs this installation that was maybe more sensical. And downstairs, I did a talk accompanied by wonderful music made by the musician who was a friend of the owner of the space, whose name is Francine McGibbon. And I alternated something that had apparent meaning with something that had apparent no meaning, a gibberish language.
And then the next image.
Pasti prompite kalampechkila alta pushti panka rompitesti polta champarukte pof patof.
Oh, I understood that perfectly. There was no. And so this is a mural that you did where you hung works on top of that's a painting, and the yellow and black is a rag rug painting, correct?
It's not a rag rug, it's a diffraction painting. There's a background painted in vinylic tempera, which is matte, and with acrylic, which is more shiny. Two fields have been applied one after the other, and they're divided by a seam, like the paintings that are now at Hal Bromm's, and they don't match. And in this case, I had painted this big, gigantic canvas for a temporary exhibition that was going to be held in the studio of a friend of mine, the late Alain Kirilli. And I put a nail in the painting and hung the small diffraction painting in it. So the painting was black and white, and the diffraction painting has color, and they all reflect one another in some awkward way, whatever way you want.
It's got a very eccentric elegance to it, I would say.
If you look at the left panel and the right panel of the black and white painting, you see that they continue without matching. So you see there's especially a geometric shape that starts in white and then ends in black in the right panel. And the same mismatching happens in the little painting with the brown on top, has some negative lines that don't meet the negative line of the gray on the bottom.
Wonderful. And then next is your this is Mantua.
Mantua. I had a very big show in Mantua 2 years ago in the museum called Palazzo Ducale, which is the palace of the Duke. And the curator accepted my hanging one of my scatter paintings, which are big acrylic paintings, together with the Baroque 17th century paintings in a room. So another room had scrolls of black and white paintings like the one we just saw hanging in the middle of other paintings from the 17th century. In this case, this painting matched the agitation of the classical 17th century Italian and European painting. I don't know who those paintings are by, but they are part of the Baroque movement. And without my knowing somehow, I think I've found myself flowing not only in the surrealist or whatever you want to call it, abstract or realistic manners, but also something seems to have been coming together with an echo of Baroqueness, which pleases me very much in my desire to open up my culture and possibly our culture in all directions.
So this painting though was not, you were not corresponding with Baroque art. This is, your composition was completely by chance?
Yeah, my composition was developed within the terms of a group of works that I'm still doing called scatter paintings. They're acrylics with thickly applied palette knife acrylics on top of loose backgrounds. And when the big exhibition at Palazzo Ducale was offered, I felt it was interesting to place this painting together with paintings that had such different semiotics from the past, and yet somehow were connected to it formally.
Well, because of the arm, the black forms look like arms or some.
I would say the agitation, if you look at the zigzagging of shapes, I feel there's some echo.
The movement.
Unintentional echo.
Definitely, yeah.
Echo,
the next.
E-C-H-O, echo.
And these are your, these are in the exhibition, Hal Bromm's exhibition?
They're in this exhibition now at Hal Bromm's. And if you look carefully, you see there's a vertical and horizontal seam that at which the left or right or up and upper or lower side don't match. There's a division there. There's a crowding of shapes of all kinds, and they meet without meeting on these seams. I painted one half first and then the other half to respond to it.
Is there a specific placement of that division?
No, more or less central by feeling horizontal and vertical. Vertical is a motif or code and translate mechanism that is by being able to zig different languages all my life.
Are you channeling Hieronymus Bosch in these compositions?
Am I traveling what?
Hieronymus Bosch. Bosch.
I don't understand that word.
El Bosco, they call him in Spain. Hieronymus Bosch.
I don't understand that word, Bosch.
Bosch. B-O-S-C-H.
Oh, Bosch, yes. Bosch is inevitably an echo for me, always. Bosch and Bruegel and Surrealism are an echo. They pop out without my even wanting. I don't intend it, but I let the influences, I think there's no art that has no influence to it. So I let influences seep in without my wanting, without my choosing to. You can look everywhere. You can see also Bosch, Jeromos Bosch. You can see Malevich. You can see all the people I love. They come in. There's Donald Judd somewhere, whom I don't particularly love, but he pops in also without my wanting.
I'm seeing those creatures, the density of it's very compressed. The composition is compressed.
Yeah, it's a filling in. In this case, it's crowding in. It's the counterpart of emptying out.
Maximalism.
Maximalism, call it maximalism, yeah. But consider at the same time, almost the same period, I did also the black and white, the black relocation and the white relocation that are shown in the same show. Here they are. They were done at the same time. So in order to relieve myself from the crowding, I also uncrowded myself a little bit. And that gave me energy to crowd again in some next thing.
Are these meditations on architecture?
The relocations, when they happen this way, become architectural. I had an experience studying, attempting to study architecture when I was in Rome before coming to the States, and that influenced me very radically. I conceive of every picture, every painting, every situation I build as being architectural. Even those crowded things, the paint of the background goes around the corner. And I always think that the painting is not a painting on the wall, but is the wall activated by the painting, regardless of what's on it.
That's a wonderful statement. Is this the next image? The Tondos.
These are painting. These were made at the same time as the other more complex paintings. I had some old tondos found in the studio before I had. I had a kind of traumatic move from New York because I couldn't afford Sting anymore. So I have all kinds of canvases that are ready to be painted, and they're wonderful occasions to rediscover them, regardless of what the intentional preparation of them might have been. And these are two cases in which that happened.
And then finally, is there one more slide? Oh, the level group.
These are the original, this is even before the level group. These are, I call them AZ. I showed them first, my first show in John Weber was Paintworks, and there were two of these face to face in a big room on empty walls. They were like mirrors of one another. The vertical brushstrokes on one with an horizontal pencil removal of the wet acrylic before it dried, and the horizontal brushstrokes on the other with a vertical removal by pencil of the acrylic before it dries. That dualism, vertical, horizontal, keeps reproducing itself, keeps giving me occasions for doing whatever feels like doing, whatever comes necessary. I work sometimes because of the spiral returns of my ideas, but sometimes also prompted by others. I published in Bomb magazine once a diagram which was like a McDonald's menu, in which I asked people to order paintings, and they would tell me what kind of size, what kind of imagery they wanted, if it had to be full or empty, thick or thin, and what colors they might want. Because the sensibility of the painting, the aesthetic and theoretical decisions seep themselves through the activity of the artist far beyond his or her intentions. I was elated when I read in the first chapter of Irving Panofsky's book, Meaning in the Visual Arts, a very important parenthesis. He says, the symbolic value of the art world, of the artwork, almost never corresponds to the artist's intention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
David, we have a few questions, if you'd like to shift to that mode.
Sure.
One question early on was, who were your mentors and teachers?
My one mentor and teacher was my stepfather, Michael Noble. He taught me very many things. And then I started going to studios of artists that interested me and begging for technical and also aesthetic information. Very many. I don't know who to name. Maybe I chose my examples. I have a high school degree, which I achieved only because my father recommended me through a friend to the commission that was going to give me the diploma. And then I was never able to study. But I read very much about theater. And when I found myself being the sole professor of contemporary or modern art and architecture for Cooper Union, I had to stop painting because I had to learn what I was going to teach. And I read a lot. And the books were not available at Cooper Union at the time. I found them at in a library, in a bookstore on Madison Avenue, which was mentored by Robert Motherwell. And I found there all the books that I learned everything I know from. And so for 2 years, I taught history of architecture and modern art in Cooper Union. I had to stop making art, or at least reduce making art to the utmost. And I studied very much in a certain way. I learned my trade there.
Another question is, Lucio's visual language is unlimited. Might he say something about the variety of mediums, forms, and approaches he has used? Well, it's a good question, but I think you've already done that, but I give you the floor.
Yeah, well, the project that I didn't set the project for myself. The way that I've lived in, that has grown into me without intending it even to pedantically, the way that has grown into me has no end. There's no conclusion. One thing I discovered recently, really 2 or 3 years ago only, was that the modernist artists in the avant-garde movement in Europe and America were all trying to do something that the market is still trying to do, to conclude, to find final solutions. And I realized that the arch enemies, the totalitarian regimes of the communist and fascist modes, all tried to find final solutions. So when people to have me conclude, to pin me down into a final solution, I immediately get terrified of this disease of modernity coming back into me, or in discourse. I'm terrified of them finding themselves trying to lock me in, like the modernists and all the evil political movements have tried to do, and the discriminatory movements of any kind, even now. So I beg them to not try to pin me down, not try to close me in anything. I'm an open event like many others. I will never conclude what I'm doing. My artworks come from all kinds of influences that are all very healthy because they are discourse with the past and the present also. Influences are welcome, and I cannot pin myself down in any intention or any conclusion because I really want not to know. As I wrote in a letter published in Art Forum in the 80s, letter addressed to an art dealer called Peter Bonnier, I want not to know what I want.
Well, that's beautiful, Lucio. Thank you. That seems appropriate way to close, don't you think so, Hal?
Absolutely. Thank you both very much. It's been a wonderful conversation, and we're getting a lot of people on the chat saying how much they've enjoyed it, which is terrific.
Oh, great. I have too, Lucio. Thank you for your generosity and your sharing your thoughts with us today.
But I'm the one who thanks for being prompted in all this. And of course, I'm going to go have dinner now because I'm in Italy and it's dinner time, wondering how badly I've expressed myself and all the things I've missed out. But thank you for prompting me.
It was brilliant, brilliant. Grazie. Have a wonderful dinner.
And thank you all for joining us today and this evening. And we'll see you next time. Ciao.
Ciao.